2024 has been a bit of a special reading year. I have read books that have left me entirely haunted, saddened, enthralled and completely gripped. From literary horror to really gripping contemporary fiction and incredible young adult novels. This list has it all. So grab a cup of tea, get comfy and settle down. You might just find your next favourite read. This first book on my list is actually an Irish novel, and it was written by an author named Audrey McGee, and the book I'm speaking about is The Colony. This book was shortlisted for the Women's Prize a couple of years ago, and it is, at its most simplest explanation, it's a book about rural and isolated Ireland, and it really feels like a love letter to the Irish language. So quick history lesson: I'm Irish, I speak English. We were clearly colonised by the English, and we did have our own language, Irish, and it is still spoken in parts of Ireland today, but sadly I can't speak Irish fluently, and most Irish people can't speak it fluently either, unfortunately. So this novel follows a family on an isolated island in the 1970s, which was a very turbulent time in Ireland. We were going through the Troubles, where Catholics and Protestants were essentially at each other's throats, and there was a lot of violence. But this family on this island lead a really insular life away from these horrors, and they rent out a little house to an English artist, and he comes to stay over the summer. But there's a Frenchman that also stays with them every summer, and he has been doing a comparative study on the Irish language to see how it has been holding its own on the island, because of course the people of this island primarily speak Irish still. And the Frenchman comes, and he is not very happy that this English speaking man is here, because he is obviously bringing more of the English language to this primarily Irish speaking island. It's quite a gentle novel in many ways, but it is interspersed with violence from the Troubles, and I thought that might not work that well, but it actually works beautifully. And in the beginning we see how this island life is very much separate from these Troubles, but as we go into the novel we read more and more about this violence and how it begins to affect the people on the island. The writing style of this one is going to be one that's not going to suit everybody. The old famous not using quotation marks, it's in this book. She doesn't use quotation marks. I think it's a stylistic choice that can actually work really well. We do flip a lot between different perspectives without any clear sort of explanation of when or how it's happening. And that sounds like it should be messy, but it works really well. This is essentially a beautifully quiet novel, and I loved the Irishness in it, the writing about the Irish language. I loved how it was interspersed with Irish language, and as somebody who does understand some Irish, I didn't find that jarring at all. I found it worked really well, but I would be curious about how it works for people who have no understanding of the Irish language at all. Don't worry, there's not much of it in here, but it is still a small factor. I thought this book was bloody beautiful, and I'm actually surprised to find it on my top 10 list, but as I kept going back through the books that I read in 2024, this one just kept coming back, and it just had to be on this list. Next up then is an absolute chunk of a book. We have a literary horror, and I'm speaking of course of Our Share of Night by Mariana Escoves. This book, so we follow Juan and Gaspar. Juan is the father and Gaspar is a young child, and they in the beginning of the book are traveling somewhere, and we don't know if they're fleeing something or if they're going on a holiday. We don't really know where they're going, why they're going. We do learn that their wife slash mother was killed not too long ago in an accident, and that's where we start from. We quickly learn that they are entrenched in a mysterious group called the Order, and Juan is a really important member, and he's trying to keep Gaspar away from them because things within the Order seem not all that great, although we don't find out a whole lot about it. There's certainly no info dumping in this book. It is a very long book, and it is one where you really have to work for the information that you get. It feels almost a little bit like a fever dream because you're reading and you get small amounts of information, but you don't really know what's going on for a lot of it, and I thought that worked really well. It is a horror, but as I've mentioned, it's a literary horror, so it is quite slow. It's very character driven. It's set over a period of quite some time in Argentina, but we do end up crossing the ocean into Europe, and we do end up traveling to some other places as well. It is set against the backdrop of the Dirty War, which is something I had actually never heard of until reading this book. So once again, I'm going to sing fiction's praises for introducing me to real life issues, where I then go Google it and go down a bit of a rabbit hole. So I feel like from fiction, even though it's not necessarily true, I do learn a lot about real life issues as somebody who is not maybe all that clued in about political and historical issues in a lot of other countries. It is quite violent at points. It can be quite disturbing. It is absolutely not a heartwarming story about a father and son, so don't pick this book up if that's what you're expecting. It can be quite gruesome and quite disturbing in really unsettling ways. This is a book that sat with me for such a long time after I read it. It put me in such a reading slump. I've honestly never read anything quite like it, and I'm really excited to read more from this author. This book I thought was absolutely spectacular. Next up then is another book by an Irish author, so we're doing quite well here. We're punching above our weight, I think, and this one feels like it was almost the book of the year. And the book I'm talking about, of course, is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. So this book follows two brothers. We have Ivan and Peter, and Ivan is the younger brother and Peter is the older brother, and Peter is in his 30s and Ivan is in his 20s. There's about 10 years between them. They are very different and there are some tensions between them both. Their father has recently died and the two boys aren't on the best of terms. Ivan is a bit of a chess prodigy while Peter works and lives in Dublin and is very much focused on his career. From the very first page I found myself really drawn into this book. It's very much a character study of these boys and their relationships, and it speaks on contemporary issues in Ireland, on a lot of political, sociological, economic issues in the way that Sally Rooney is quite known for these days. I will say Normal People is probably one of my favourite books of all time. This book is technically the better book, but I still feel like Normal People has my heart. It is very typical Sally Rooney. There aren't quotation marks. You get what you get. If you know that you don't like Sally Rooney, you're not going to like this book. It does feel quite heavy at times. It is very literary. I was really surprised by and really loved the representation of chronic pain in here, because it's not something that I see represented in contemporary fiction all that much, and it's something that I'm personally affected by, but I just feel as though I never see it anywhere really. And I thought that it was dealt with so wonderfully and with such tact and such care, and it felt so familiar. And I will say at times when Rooney was writing about the character with chronic pain, I had to put the book down because I was sobbing so much. I doubt that it will affect people who don't live with chronic pain in the same way, but it really hit something within me and I felt so seen and so beautifully and wonderfully represented. This novel, just like other Rooney novels, doesn't rely on dramatic twists and turns. It is, as I've mentioned, very much a character driven book, and if you're somebody who prefers plot forward books, this probably won't be for you. Again, this is Marmite. Some people love Sally Rooney and some people just can't abide by her writing, and fair enough, all opinions are valid. I didn't personally love the ending of this, but that's just based on my likes and dislikes. I still thought it wound up quite nicely, and I know a lot of other people really love the ending, so give or take, but overall I still feel like this book absolutely deserves a place on this list. And if it sounds like something that might be up your street, give it a go. Sally Rooney, I think she's masterful. Next up then, and I thought on this one for a while, we have a duology, and it is a young adult fantasy duology. It is written by Leigh Bardugo and is essentially a sequel to the Shadow and Bone trilogy. So I feel like we have very much leveled up with this duology, and of course I'm talking about the Six of Crows duology. So we have Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. So we are following a group of ragtag teenagers. They all have different skills and different powers and different different abilities, and they are hired to pull off a heist. So this first novel is very much a heist novel, and we follow each of these characters from their different perspectives. We learn their backgrounds, we learn their likes, dislikes, and their motivations. I thought this book was so clever and so fun and so engaging. Leigh Bardugo has absolutely leveled up here, because I thought the Shadow and Bone trilogy was okay, but I didn't love it, and I probably only really read this duology because there is so much hype around it. The plot is so impressive. It's packed with so many twists and turns and things that I just wasn't expecting, and it really felt like something that just left me on the edge of my seat. I know that YA gets a lot of bad rap for being very typically YA, but I absolutely love a lot of YA books. I know that they do read young, which is quite the point, but I don't think that we should be disregarding YA or children's books or middle grade books either, because I have found such value in these books as well. They still follow the same themes and the same difficulties that we encounter in more adult books, but they're dealt with in such a tactful and generally more fun and insightful way, I think. So as with the Shadow and Bone books, we are set in the Grishaverse, which is a really well thought out and really well explained environment and world. We have maps at the start, we have magic systems that go really deep, we have historical and political plots that are quite incredible. There's such high tension, such high stakes. You really fall in love with the characters. They're quite uniquely different, and the dialogue is really quite fun, and our characters really bounce off against each other. Things happen in this duology that I just wasn't expecting. It's probably a little bit darker maybe than I was expecting, which did add to my enjoyment of the duology overall. I know that this is probably not the most original duology to see on a best books list on BookTube, but pals, I couldn't not put these books on this list. I had such fun with them, and I really recommend picking them up if they sound like something that you might enjoy. Next up then apparently is another Irish book, and that book that I'm speaking about is Solar Bones by Mike McCormack. This book, to me, I felt like it was close to a masterpiece. I started to read the book physically, and I found the voice a little bit difficult to get into. I ended up changing over to listening to this one on audio, and pals, let me tell you, for me that was very much the right decision. So it is read by a man with an Irish accent, and this book very much feels like somebody sitting at their kitchen table over a cup of tea with you, just regaling you with stories of their life. No real intense structure of where we're going. Things just meander quite a bit, and that sounds like it should be messy or difficult to follow, but honestly this is a book that I absolutely just thought worked so well. So we follow a man who is an engineer, and he is speaking about his life with his family and the larger things that impact a normal life. I feel like this book really captures the essence of a normal person's life, and it just felt so immersive and so incredibly engaging, and I wasn't expecting it from this book at all. I thought it was going to be heavy, I thought it was going to be difficult, but pals, let me tell you, I loved it. McCormack's prose was absolutely stunning. It read so Irish in that it just felt like one of my neighbours having a conversation with me, and I just loved that. It felt so authentic and so real and just so perfect, and I was absolutely enthralled. This novel is really a testament to McCormack's skill as a storyteller. It feels like it should be disjointed, it feels like it should be all over the place, but honestly it works so beautifully, and it really brings us into this family's life, and it just feels like we're sitting at their kitchen table with them. It is a really quiet and introspective work. We get a lot of our protagonist's insights. He just takes us wherever his stories and his mind goes. It really challenges you to reflect on your own life, your own relationships, your environments, your motivations, the things that bring you sparks of joy and the things that really upset you. I don't know, there was something in this little novel that just absolutely ruined me in the best way. There was a bit near the end where I was out for a walk and I actually had to stop and spin in a circle because I didn't know what to do with the information I'd just been given. It was brilliantly done. It was just unexpected for me. It was beautiful. I just cannot sing this novel's praises enough. I loved it, and I think it will be a favourite for a long time to come. It really demands your attention and then rewards you richly for giving that. And friends, pick it up if it's something that you feel in the mood for it. It's so rich and so literary and just so quintessentially Irish. I loved it. Next up then is a book that I found so enthralling and so interesting, and honestly I didn't expect to love it as much as I did. It was very much a hyped novel this year. It was a new release and it's by Kayleigh Bradley, and of course I'm speaking about The Ministry of Time. I was so delightfully surprised by this book. So we follow a story about a clandestine government department, and they deal with time travel, and our protagonist is somebody who works as a bridge, and they're bringing people from the past into contemporary London. And what the bridges do is they help these people from the past to acclimatise to current day. Our bridge lives with a man who was on an expedition as an explorer, and this book is so unexpectedly genre defying. It has such excellent writing, and it really dealt with issues and themes like colonialism and racism and misogyny in a way that I absolutely was not expecting. I thought this was going to be a bit of a fun romp, and while it was really insightful and really in-depth, really well researched, and just really quite beautifully written. The relationships between the characters, like the camaraderie, the tension, and even moments of humour, they add this complexity to a plot that's already really compelling. Bradley's prose is a real highlight in this. I just found myself swept away. I didn't even realise that I was reading while I was reading. It's handled so beautifully, and I couldn't believe that this was actually a debut, because it just is something else. I loved it, and as somebody who isn't necessarily all that interested in history, I thought that this might be one that might not hit the mark for me. But it taught me beautifully. It worked really well, and honestly it's just such a thrilling adventure and like a poignant exploration of human nature, a celebration of history. Whether you're a fan of speculative fiction or whether you're a fan of historical drama or character driven stories, this is probably going to be one for you. And I will say also that ending was spectacular. Wow, I loved it. Kayleigh Bradley has really crafted something special here, and I honestly cannot wait to read what she writes next. Next up then is a book that has been very much doing the rounds again in terms of popularity this year, and the book I'm speaking about is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, and it is translated from French by Ross Fort, I think. I'm still thinking about this book months and months later. It is one of those books that gets inside you and keeps your brain ticking over. So we follow a group of 40 women who in the beginning of the book are in a cage, and our main protagonist is quite a bit younger than the rest of the women. Most of the women are middle-aged or older, and she is a teenager, and so they're all kept in this cage and nobody knows how they got there, why they're there, what's going on. They just know that they're kept there, they're never allowed out, and there are men who guard and patrol and feed them and don't communicate with them or teach them or tell them what's going on. And this is happening for years, so our young protagonist doesn't remember life before this cage. We don't necessarily know why she's so much younger, but in this book our women happen to escape and they move out to try to get some answers and try to find some civilization, try to figure out what's going on. The narrative voice in this book is really incredible. As I've mentioned, it is from the perspective of a young girl, and she feels quite naive and quite clueless, which you would really understand from somebody in this particular situation. The writing works perfectly, so we're set in this really sparse land and the writing is really sparse, really easy to read, and it feels like a meditation so much on what it means to be human, how we are human even without the trappings of civilization, without culture, without morality, just without society in general. Who are we when all that's taken away? It is written so perfectly and it leaves so many questions unanswered, which I know is something that not a lot of people actually enjoy, but for me personally, I cannot sing the praises of this book enough. It's not a novel for somebody who's seeking easy answers or simple, tight resolutions. It's a novel that will leave you trying to suss things out for a long time after. My brain was ticking over for so long. Sometimes I just think about this book when I'm sitting there. I just think it was masterfully done. It's Again, another book that really demands your attention and then rewards you with something really special. It is such a great book, and there's a reason that so many people have been singing this book's praises. It's quite short, it's very easy to read, and it feels like a really important book to read. Hartman has really created a book of quiet power and devastating insight, and it's one that resonates just so long after the final line. I cannot sing this book's praises highly enough. It is masterful. Pick it up. Next up then is a trilogy that is part of a larger series, and this trilogy is written by Robin Hobb. So the larger series I'm speaking of is The Realm of the Elderlings, which is a series that comprises of 16 books. And the trilogy that I'm going to speak about is The Liveship Traders, which is the second trilogy in this overarching series. These books are quite big, so I'm only going to hold up the first one. So this one comes immediately after the Farseer trilogy, which, if you've been following me for a while, you will know I loved. Big fan of Robin Hobb here. Started reading her books last year and will never look back. I love her writing. So these books are fantasy books, but they feel almost like literary fantasy. They're quite slow, they're quite character driven. The plot isn't necessarily very fast, and while you are made to work a little bit for the grand conclusion, when you get to the conclusions, when you figure out what's going on, when Robin Hobb really gives you what for, it is so worth it. That said, the journey to getting there I feel is spectacular as well. She is a master of character work. I've never read fantasy books like these before or since. This particular trilogy, we follow a family and a group of other characters in a world whereby there are things known as live ships, and it's generally families who come from quite a bit of wealth who end up with these live ships. So a live ship is made from wizard wood, and wizard wood is very difficult to obtain, it's very expensive, and there are other obstacles to getting it as well. So a family will buy wizard wood and make a ship out of it, and then 3 consecutive generations will have to die on this boat for this ship to quicken to become alive. And we follow a real variety of different characters. I love how Hobb writes female characters as well. These books are so clever. There was a section in it that I really wasn't enjoying or understanding all that much, but when you realize what these things are, it becomes, oh my gosh, it's such a stunning and beautiful revelation when you get there. It probably took me a bit longer than the average person, but I got there and I loved it. Now I will say you probably do really need to start at the Farseer trilogy and read those 3 books first before you read these ones, but that's no bad thing because the Farseer trilogy itself is also something that's really incredible in my humble opinion. So these are multi-POV stories. We follow many different points of view, and I feel like every one of them adds value. Every one of them works perfectly. There's no POV in these books where I felt like, oh god, you know, sometimes you have to traipse through a perspective to get back to the characters that you're really enjoying. Every POV adds something so perfect to these books. They're so fresh and unusual and special, and honestly friends, I cannot speak highly enough of Robin Hobb and her writing. I'm so excited to read more of The Realm of the Elderlings over the course of 2025. And next up then is a book that I can't speak too much about. 1, because it's quite difficult to speak about, and 2, because I don't want to give too much of the plot away. But the book that I'm speaking about is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So Anthony Doerr is the author who wrote All the Light We Cannot See, and while that is a very massively hyped book that a lot of people have read and really loved, I feel like Cloud Cuckoo Land feels like such a step up. It deserves so much more attention in my humble opinion. It blends together a story that encompasses mythology, fantasy, sci-fi, historical fiction, and literary fiction. Sounds like it should be messy. It is absolutely not. It works really well. And we are set in a number of different POVs that are set in different points in history. So we have basically the past, the present, and the future, and it works so well. It is immersive, it is intricate, it is awe-inspiring, and it's a book that really celebrates books and libraries and how books can bring us together over large expanses of space and time. This book creates a whole world that I was never in any hurry to return from. It feels so well researched, so well written, so well done. It almost feels like a different author. I just feel like, yes, All the Light We Cannot See was enjoyable and accessible and readable, but this book is something else altogether. I loved it. It feels so much like a book that's about curiosity and humanity, and while I'd love to give you an outline of the plot, I don't really want to ruin the story on you either. Just trust me, if you love multi-generational stories and books that feel fresh and unusual and immersive, this is definitely a book for you. And then last and absolutely not least, we have my only reread of the year, which is incidentally my only 5 stars of the year. Now that said, I've loved all of these books. I feel like from reading this book the second time, I got so much more from it. I gave it, I think, 3 stars on my first read, and on my second read I gave it 5. And of course, we're not going to leave you in suspense for any longer. The book I'm talking about is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. So this book is essentially a letter written by a young immigrant man to his mother. So they have emigrated from Vietnam to America, and he is writing this letter in English and his mother can't read it, so it's a very interesting perspective. It is a letter that will never be engaged with by its intended recipient. That said, it absolutely doesn't feel like an epistolary novel, but that is essentially the perspective that we are coming from. I loved the slow, abstract pacing of this novel. So Ocean Vuong is first and foremost a poet, and you can really tell this is a prose novel, but there's something very lyrical, very beautiful, very insightful about these vignettes that he writes about. So he writes about this young man's life growing up in America as an immigrant, and let me tell you, it is such a beautifully paced, beautifully written, wonderfully wrought, raw, harrowing, beautiful, joyful expression of queerness, expression of culture, expression of humanity. It is so good. It's very much a character-driven novel, and this is one that, again, is not going to be for everybody. There is a plot, but it does meander quite a bit, and I will say the plot is not necessarily the most important thing about this novel. It is definitely the prose, the writing, the insights. It is so beautifully done. It's just really wonderful, at times desperately sad, and if you know me, I love a sad story. Ocean Vuong has a new novel coming out in 2025, The Emperor of Gladness, and let me tell you, it is probably my most anticipated book of next year. I cannot wait for it. I really found it interesting how I didn't love this book the first time around, but the second time around I think it was very much a right time, right place book. It is spectacular. The hype is real, and I know some people absolutely hate this book and don't get it at all, but if this is a book that you enjoy, you will probably enjoy it immensely. If you don't like it within the first few pages, maybe don't continue, because it's probably not one that you will love. I love the story of how this boy goes from being a child to an adult, the things that he has to endure, but also the joy and the sparks that he finds, the little glimmers of happiness and hope, and how it deals with the immigrant experience, and how it deals with hope and grief and love and friendship and so many other things as well. This was my favourite book of 2024, and I feel like it is probably a book that I will reread again, and that's saying something as somebody who is not now, nor has ever been, much of a rereader. And so friends, that is that. Out of over 100 books this year, those are the books that I have chosen to be tip top of my list. I haven't put them in any particular order, because you could ask me on any given day and I would put them in different order. I love them all equally in their own ways, and I feel like they were all just a really great example of what a spectacular reading year I have had. Hopefully you've found something in here that might just become a new favourite for you too. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow along on my reading journey into 2025. And otherwise, pals, as ever, I'm so grateful and blessed and thankful to have had you here over this year. You've all been so kind and so encouraging and so lovely, and this channel has become a little wholesome space for me, and hopefully for you too. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you had a lovely one, and otherwise, pals, Happy New Year to you, and I'll see you in 2025.